The night should have been filled with joy. But instead, it became the moment I learned exactly where I stood in my own family's story. I remember the glow of string lights above the lawn, the music drifting softly from the quartet, and the laughter that rolled through the crowd like warm summer air. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might belong in that glow. I had even worn the pearl earrings my mother gave me, hoping they still carried some meaning. But instead of being guided toward the long table where family and friends gathered, I was ushered through a side door into a cramped room tucked behind the kitchen. The smell of food and the clatter of trays filled the air as servers brushed past me, eyes averted, pretending not to notice my presence. The chair they pointed me to was wedged between a rolling cart of stacked plates and a door that swung every time someone carried a dish out to the reception. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated. My daughter-in-law, Harper, made her entrance soon after. She floated in with that lace gown and practiced smile, her voice pitched just loud enough for the staff to hear her dismiss me, as though I were one of them kitchen help, invisible, an inconvenience to hide away. She never looked me in the eye. To her, I wasn't a guest. I was a burden, one she could quietly push to the shadows without a second thought. And my son, my only child, stood just beyond that doorway, glass in hand, laughing with his business partners. He saw, he knew, and he did nothing. The son I had raised alone after his father passed. The boy whose future I had fought for with every ounce of strength I had, turned his face from me in my hour of humiliation. The sting of it cut deeper than words can capture. My chest tightened, but my mind grew sharper with each passing second. I realized in that small, overheated room that this wasn't weakness, it was clarity. They thought they could write me out of the story I had built. They thought age had left me powerless, a woman to be tucked away, silenced, forgotten. But as I sat there, surrounded by clinking glasses and muffled laughter, a different truth settled into me like steel. They thought I was powerless. They were wrong. And that was the night I began remembering everything I had sacrificed to get here. I wasn't always the woman they dismissed so easily. Once, I carried the weight of an entire household on my shoulders, and I did it with a strength I didn't even know I had. When my husband died young, leaving me with a little boy and a mortgage that felt bigger than the sky, I didn't crumble. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, making sure the lights never flickered and the refrigerator never stood empty. I learned how to stretch every dollar until it nearly tore, clipping coupons late at night under the soft glow of a kitchen lamp. There were nights when exhaustion pressed down so heavily I thought I might not wake up in the morning, but I always did. I woke, packed lunches, tied shoelaces, and sent my boy off to school with a smile I sometimes had to fake. I stood at every parent-teacher meeting, every baseball game, cheering until my throat was raw, even if it meant racing straight from my shift in wrinkled clothes and tired shoes. I remember skipping meals so he could eat more, turning down invitations from friends because every spare dollar went toward his school trips or a new pair of sneakers when his toes pushed against the seams. Dreams I once had: travel, art classes, a little bakery I imagined owning one day. Those were folded neatly and placed on a shelf. My son was my dream, and I poured everything I was into, making sure he had a future brighter than mine. And yet, after all of that, I find myself treated like a relic, pushed to the edges of my own family. The same boy whose every need I once met can now look through me as though I'm no one at all. That truth cuts deeper than hunger or sleepless nights ever did. But here's the thing about sacrifice. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you unshakable. They may think I'm invisible now, but they've forgotten who I had to be to survive all those years. And slowly, quietly, I feel that woman returning. The one who knows how to fight back? When I left that party humiliated, I could have gone home, cried into a pillow, and told myself this was just the way of things. That's what they expected. A quiet retreat, a silent acceptance. But something inside me hardened instead. I wasn't going to let my life be written by hands that only saw me as disposable. The very next morning, while the house was still cloaked in dawn, I made my first call. My lawyer, an old colleague who had guided me through the years after my husband's passing, answered with surprise in his voice. I told him calmly that I needed new papers drawn up, power of attorney revoked, a will rewritten, accounts secured. His silence on the other end said everything he knew. I wasn't acting on impulse. I was acting on clarity. From there, I dialed my bank. My voice was steady as I confirmed balances and initiated transfers. Every dollar I had worked and saved for was quietly redirected into places where prying eyes couldn't reach. As the banker's voice confirmed each transaction, I felt the tightness in my chest ease, as though a weight I'd carried for too long was finally lifting. I gathered every document, birth certificates, deeds, insurance records, and tucked them into a folder that rarely left my sight. For years, I had been careful, maybe even paranoid, keeping records organized, receipts filed. Now I understood why. That instinct to protect had been preparing me for this exact moment. No one in the family suspected a thing. To them, I was still the quiet figure in the corner, fading into wallpaper. They didn't see the woman who had once survived nights of hunger, endless work, and loneliness. They didn't see the woman who now spent each hour tightening the knots of a plan that would hold them accountable. It wasn't anger that drove me, it was dignity. A calm, clear recognition that I deserved better than to be used. My hands trembled not with fear, but with the thrill of knowing that, for the first time in years, I was reclaiming my life on my terms. And soon enough, they'd discover exactly what I had done. Looking back, I can see how the walls around me were built brick by brick, word by word, until I was boxed into silence. It never came all at once. It started small, like a comment here or a suggestion there, little reminders that my place was shrinking. Harper would smile sweetly while insisting I shouldn't tire myself going out with friends, saying it was better for me to rest. My son would nod along, adding that Tyler needed me at home anyway, as though my role was nothing more than free childcare. At first, I believed them. I told myself they meant well, that they wanted to protect me. But slowly, invitations stopped coming. Book club ladies stopped calling. Church friends assumed I wasn't interested anymore. The house grew quieter, and the silence settled on me like dust. Then came the money. My son leaned across my kitchen table one afternoon, asking me to add Harper to my credit card. He called it practical, for emergencies with Tyler. I agreed, eager to be included, to be trusted. But the statements told a different story. Dinners at restaurants I had never been invited to. Spa packages I never enjoyed. Purchases that had nothing to do with my grandson. When I asked about them, I was told I was overreacting, that I was confused. My heart sank as I began to wonder if they truly believed I was losing my mind. And the remarks so casual, so cutting, jokes about how forgetful I was, how useless at dinners, how old-fashioned. Each word chipped away at me, leaving me smaller, more uncertain. I started to doubt myself, to question if perhaps I really was a burden. But deep down, I knew better. I saw the pattern. They weren't protecting me, they were erasing me. With every dismissal, every laugh at my expense, every dollar spent behind my back, they were writing me out of my own life. And I realized, with a chill that turned to fire in my chest, that if I didn't act soon, I would vanish entirely. The night of the dinner, I dressed with deliberate care, not in the muted tones they had grown used to seeing me wear, but in a deep navy dress that carried weight and presence. I pinned back my hair, clasped a silver necklace around my throat, and studied myself in the mirror. I didn't see a fragile woman. I saw someone preparing for battle, though no one else would recognize it just yet. The house smelled of roasted chicken and buttered rolls when I arrived. Harper flitted about with an apron tied too neatly at her waist, greeting me with a smile that was stretched a little too wide. My son poured wine with the enthusiasm of a man trying to prove something. Their laughter filled the air louder than usual, almost rehearsed. I sat at the table and let them perform. Every gesture, every word, rang hollow. They asked about my health in voices pitched just a little too brightly. They complimented my dress, though I caught the flicker of disapproval in Harper's eyes. They passed dishes back and forth as though they were actors on a stage, each playing the role of the doting family. Inside, I was silent, but not empty. I watched them the way one watches a storm forming on the horizon, measuring its power, waiting for the moment when the sky would split open. My fork scraped softly against the china, each bite of food deliberate, each glance calculated. They thought I was subdued, lulled by the comfort of a warm meal and the illusion of belonging. What they didn't know was that every paper had been signed, every transfer made, every safeguard set. I had stripped them of the control they craved. And tonight, I would begin to show them just how wrong they were to underestimate me. As the meal wore on, their chatter blurred into background noise. I could feel the tension beneath their cheer, the weight of a plan waiting to be unveiled. But it was my plan that would cut deepest. I lifted my glass slowly, letting the pause hang longer than necessary. And in that moment, I thought to myself, tonight, they'd meet someone different. When the plates had been cleared and the candles burned low, the conversation shifted. My son cleared his throat, his hands folded too neatly in his lap, while Harper leaned forward with that careful expression she wore whenever she wanted to seem concerned. I already knew what was coming, but I let them play it out. They began with gentle words about how much they cared for me, how they worried for my safety, how the house was too much for someone my age. Then the truth emerged. Wrapped in a tone of false compassion, they had found a facility, a so-called community where I could make friends my own age, a nursing home, my independence. My voice reduced to a line item in their plan. I sat very still, hands folded on the tablecloth, my eyes on theirs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply let them finish, nodding as though I were absorbing their wisdom. But inside, I felt the calm strength of every step I had taken in secret. When they finally paused, waiting for my agreement or my tears, I leaned back in my chair and let a small smile form. "That's interesting timing," I said softly, though in truth, I was speaking more to myself than to them. Their brows furrowed. My son asked what I meant, And that was when I began. I told them how the power of attorney they had so casually counted on had been revoked legally and permanently. Their control was gone. I watched the color drain from Harper's face. Then I explained that every account they thought they could touch had already been moved beyond their reach. Their greedy plans evaporated in an instant. And then, the final strike the will, I told them it had been rewritten. No longer would my son inherit everything as he once assumed. The future belonged elsewhere. The assets they had treated as their own had been redirected, placed safely in a trust for my grandchildren. Every dollar they thought would cushion their lifestyle had been pulled away, locked where only innocence and honesty could benefit. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Harper's quick inhale. My son's hands, once so steady, trembled against his knees. He looked at me as though seeing a stranger across the table. I met his gaze evenly. For the first time in years, I wasn't the mother begging for scraps of respect. I was the woman who had built, endured, sacrificed, and reclaimed. Their world had cracked open in front of them, but mine had never been clearer. For the first time, I held the power. And though they thought this was the end of my defiance, they had no idea a darker betrayal still waited to be uncovered. I thought the worst had already passed when I stripped them of their imagined control. But life has a cruel way of showing you just how deep betrayal can run. Not long after that dinner, I began reviewing the old paperwork I had kept tucked away: insurance policies, savings records, the files my husband and I once guarded together. At first, it was routine, almost comforting. But then, buried in the details, I saw something that froze me where I sat. The numbers didn't match. Payments I remembered, sums I had counted on, were missing. My husband's life insurance, the policy I leaned on after his death, hadn't been paid out in full. A portion had been siphoned away, redirected without my knowledge. And as I traced the trail, it became painfully clear who had guided those funds into different hands. My own son. The realization knocked the air from my lungs. For a long moment, I sat staring at the papers, my vision blurring with tears I didn't want to shed. It wasn't just greed. It was theft dressed up as care. Deception built on the assumption that grief had left me blind. I thought of all the nights I had gone without, all the meals I had skipped to give him more, all the dreams I had buried so his could take flight. And this was what I received in return: a son who looked into his mother's grief and saw an opportunity to plunder what little security she had left. Shock gave way to devastation, and devastation to something sharper. Rage, but not the kind that lashes out wildly. This was focused, controlled, burning like a steady flame. If they had imagined I would roll over and accept this as just another wound, they had forgotten who raised that household from nothing. This betrayal was larger than I could have imagined. But so was my resolve. I would not stop at reclaiming my dignity. I would ensure every stolen dollar, every deceitful act, came to light. Justice was no longer just an option, it was a promise. Justice came slowly, but it came with weight. The documents I filed moved like dominoes through the system, each one setting off the next. My son and Harper could no longer hide behind smiles or polite excuses once the evidence surfaced. Their financial misdeeds became matters of record. Their schemes laid bare under the harsh light of law. Court dates replaced dinner parties. Instead of vacations, they faced creditors. The house they had once filled with laughter that excluded me was stripped from them, sold to cover debts they thought I would never notice. It was not revenge that steadied me through those months, but justice, a steady hand guiding me back to myself. For every tear I had once shed in silence, I felt a piece of my dignity return as their web unraveled. And I began again. I signed the lease on a small apartment downtown, one with sunlight pouring through the windows in the morning and a balcony that looked out over a quiet park. It wasn't the grand home I had given up years before, but it was mine, entirely mine. No one told me when to eat, where to sit, or what to do. The freedom was intoxicating. On Saturdays, my grandson would visit. He would run down the hall toward me, his laughter echoing against the walls, and we'd sit together baking cookies or sketching pictures in the sunlight. His innocence reminded me why I fought so hard for him, for myself, for the right to live without fear of being erased. The storm had passed. My life wasn't perfect, but it was my own, and in that simple truth, I found peace. And it was in that peace that I began to see the lesson more clearly. When I look back on everything, I see my story not just as a battle, but as a reminder of something we all forget too easily. Kindness is not weakness. For years, I believed that giving and sacrificing meant I would always be valued. But I learned that even the deepest love can be twisted when boundaries are ignored. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. I don't regret the sacrifices I made for my son. I gave him everything I could because I believed in building a better future for him. But I do regret how long it took me to see that protecting myself was not selfish, it was necessary. When you give endlessly without guarding your dignity, there will always be people willing to take more. Standing up for myself didn't erase the years of hurt, but it gave me something far more powerful: peace. And in that peace, I discovered freedom. I realized I wasn't defined by the way others treated me, but by the courage I found to stand, even when standing meant standing alone. If there's one lesson I hope others carry from my story, it's this: don't let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter. Don't confuse silence with love or endurance with loyalty. You have every right to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to protect the life you built with your own hands. And if you've ever felt overlooked, invisible, or used, know that you are not powerless. The strength you need is already inside you. Sometimes, it just takes the sting of betrayal to wake it up. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and leave a comment with your own experiences. Your voice matters. Never let anyone take that from you.